The standard morning head count at the Dr. Lane Murray unit in Gatesville, Texas, was usually a predictable ritual, a rhythmic accounting of bodies that defined the beginning and end of every day. On most mornings, the metallic clang of doors and the clip tones of correctional officers echoed through cell block D with an unvarying precision. But as the spring of 2017 unfolded, a quiet discord began to hum beneath the surface of this rigid schedule, a deviation that in retrospect signaled a profound and irreversible disruption. Inmate Sarah Jenkins, 28 years old, was one of thousands within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice system, serving a sentence that was intended to be a contained period of her life. Her presence in the Lane Murray unit, a facility designated for female offenders, was the culmination of a series of decisions and circumstances that had brought her to this specific location. Sarah had arrived at the Gatesville facility in the late summer of 2016, transferred from a county jail where she had awaited trial. Her original conviction was for drug possession, a charge that carried a sentence of 7 years. She was a woman of unremarkable appearance, yet she possessed a quiet intensity, a resilience that had allowed her to navigate the unforgiving landscape of incarceration with a certain internal composure. Sarah was not known for creating disturbances. She adhered to the rules, kept to herself, and performed her assigned duties within the laundry facility without complaint. Her personal file, a document of meticulous detail, offered little to suggest she would become the focal point of a statewide scandal, a grim highlight in the often overlooked world of prison life. Officer David Miller, 34, was one of the many correctional officers assigned to the Dr. Lane Murray unit. He had been with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 6 years, a tenure that suggested a degree of stability and familiarity with the system's intricate rules. Miller was assigned to various posts within the facility, including evening shifts in Cell Block D, the very block where Sarah Jenkins was housed. He was perceived by colleagues as a dedicated, if somewhat reserved, officer who upheld the strictures of prison security. His personnel file contained no significant disciplinary actions, portraying an image of competence and reliability. This professional facade, however, would later be starkly contrasted with the reality of his actions, slowly unraveling under the weight of an escalating pattern of misconduct. The initial deviations were subtle, almost imperceptible to the casual observer. Inmate Jenkins, who typically remained withdrawn, began to exhibit minor changes in her routine. She would occasionally be seen in areas of the block during times when inmate movement was restricted, or lingered longer than necessary in common areas when Officer Miller was on duty. These occurrences were not dramatic enough to warrant immediate formal complaints, but they registered as minor anomalies in the minds of other inmates and perhaps some junior officers. The Dr. Lane Murray unit, like any correctional facility, operated on a system of rigid control, and even minor deviations were technically violations of standard protocol. These small breaches, however, went largely unreported in the early stages, often dismissed as an inmate's attempt to test boundaries or a guard's momentary lapse in vigilance. The relationship between Sarah Jenkins and Officer Miller began to deepen beyond these initial discreet encounters. Witnesses later reported seeing them engage in conversations that extended beyond the usual prisoner-guard interactions, sometimes lasting longer than necessary during shift changes or while Miller was conducting routine checks. These exchanges often took place in quieter corners of Cell Block D, away from the immediate line of sight of other staff members. The subtle shift in their dynamic was observed by other inmates, whose unique vantage point within the facility afforded them a keen sense of the underlying currents of prison life. Whispers began to circulate, quiet observations shared between cells, but without concrete proof. These remained within the confines of inmate gossip. The highly structured environment of the prison, designed to prevent such illicit connections, paradoxically became the very stage for their development. The frequency of these interactions gradually increased throughout the late fall of 2016 and into the early winter months of Officer Miller, who previously maintained a strictly professional distance from inmates, began to exhibit a discernible favoritism towards Sarah Jenkins. She would receive preferred assignments within the laundry, or her requests for certain minor privileges were more readily granted than those of other inmates. This preferential treatment, while not overtly illegal in itself, was a clear violation of correctional ethics and fairness protocols. It created an environment where Miller's authority was subtly undermined, and Jenkins's position within the inmate population became increasingly complex. The small, almost imperceptible actions compounded over weeks, weaving a pattern of access and proximity that slowly chipped away at the boundaries of their roles. The developing pattern of interaction was facilitated by Officer Miller's intimate knowledge of the prison's schedule and the precise routines of his shift. He knew when certain areas were less supervised, when other officers were on break, or when the overall attention of the unit shifted to other activities. This strategic exploitation of systemic vulnerabilities allowed the interactions to escalate without immediate detection by higher command. Sarah Jenkins, for her part, navigated these opportunities with a quiet acquiescence, seemingly understanding the unspoken rules of this clandestine arrangement. The Dr. Lane Murray unit, for all its strictures, relied on human vigilance, and where vigilance faltered, illicit connections could take root. This period represented a critical escalation, laying the groundwork for more serious transgressions that would soon follow. By early 2017, the quiet whispers among the inmates had solidified into a more distinct understanding. Officer Miller and inmate Jenkins were engaged in an inappropriate relationship. This knowledge, though unconfirmed by official channels, created an atmosphere of unease within Cell Block D. Some inmates felt a sense of injustice regarding Jenkins's preferential treatment, while others recognized the inherent dangers of such a prohibited liaison within the prison walls. These concerns, however, were rarely voiced to correctional staff due to the prevailing inmate code of silence and the pervasive fear of retribution. The lack of formal reports allowed the situation to continue unchecked. Growing in scope and boldness, the absence of external scrutiny meant that the internal dynamics of the cell block were increasingly influenced by this secret, illicit connection, leading to a critical turning point that would soon become undeniable. The subtle physical changes in Sarah Jenkins, her increasing fatigue, and unexplained nausea, had begun to draw the attention of her fellow inmates, though they were initially attributed to the general stress and poor diet, endemic to prison life. As the weeks progressed into February 2017, Sarah Jenkins's physical changes became more pronounced and difficult to conceal. Her appetite shifted erratically, and she was observed making frequent trips to the infirmary, complaining of persistent morning sickness. These symptoms, common in early pregnancy, were initially dismissed by prison medical staff as gastrointestinal issues or stress-related ailments, prevalent among incarcerated individuals. The unique environment of a correctional facility often obscured medical realities, with common symptoms frequently attributed to routine ailments or malingering. This diagnostic oversight allowed the pregnancy to progress without immediate official detection, further complicating the unfolding narrative. However, among her fellow inmates, who shared close quarters and observed each other with an acute awareness, the signs were undeniable. Inmate Maria Rodriguez, who shared a cell with Jenkins for a period, later testified that Sarah had confided in her about her growing concern regarding her changing body. She was scared, Rodriguez stated in a hushed interview. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew it wasn't right. This shared intimacy, born of necessity within the confines of the cell, revealed Sarah's inner turmoil and her dawning realization of her condition. The stark implications of a pregnancy within a maximum security women's prison were immediately evident, raising questions of paternity, safety, and future. The routine nature of prison life meant that Sarah Jenkins had undergone a series of standard medical examinations upon her arrival and periodically thereafter. It was during one such routine checkup in late February 2017 that the truth began to surface. A nurse practitioner conducting a general health screening noted several physiological markers that prompted further investigation. The subsequent medical tests, conducted within the confines of the prison infirmary, yielded definitive results. On March 1, 2017, the Dr. Lane Murray Unit Administration received the official confirmation. Inmate Sarah Jenkins was pregnant. The news rippled through the administrative offices with immediate and profound shock. A pregnancy within a secure correctional facility was a severe breach of protocol and a serious security concern, demanding immediate and rigorous action. The revelation triggered an immediate internal investigation led by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice TDCJ Office of the Inspector General OIG. The first and most critical question was the identity of the father. Given the secure environment and the strict separation of male and female staff from inmates, suspicion immediately turned towards the correctional officers assigned to Sarah Jenkins's unit. Officer David Miller, due to the increasingly obvious nature of his preferential treatment towards Jenkins, quickly became the primary focus of this inquiry. His shifts, his access logs, and his reported interactions with Jenkins were meticulously scrutinized. Every camera angle, every door log, Every recorded communication within the cell block was reviewed with intense focus, revealing a pattern of suspicious proximity and unexplained access. When confronted by OIG investigators on March 5, 2017, Officer Miller initially denied any wrongdoing. He asserted that his interactions with Sarah Jenkins were strictly professional, limited to his duties as a correctional officer. He maintained a calm, composed demeanor during the initial interview, attempting to deflect suspicion by attributing the accusation to inmate gossip or misinterpretation. However, the investigators presented him with irrefutable evidence, detailed logs of his access to Jenkins's cell block during unusual hours, eyewitness accounts from other officers and inmates, and a history of preferential treatment that could no longer be dismissed as mere coincidence. The weight of this accumulated evidence began to chip away at his carefully constructed denial, revealing the fragility of his claims. The confirmation of the pregnancy and the subsequent targeting of Officer Miller caused a significant upheaval within the Dr. Lane Murray unit. The staff morale plummeted, marked by an atmosphere of mistrust and suspicion. The very integrity of the institution, designed to be a bastion of control, was now openly questioned. The implications extended beyond the immediate individuals involved. The incident highlighted systemic vulnerabilities and raised concerns about the overall security and oversight within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The case swiftly escalated from an internal disciplinary matter to a criminal investigation, involving local law enforcement and the Texas Rangers, who were called in to ensure an impartial and thorough inquiry into the grave allegation. The legal process against Officer Miller began swiftly following the OIG investigation's initial findings. On March 10, 2017, David Miller was formally arrested and charged with official oppression, a felony under Texas law, defined as a public servant's intentional misuse of power. The arrest took place quietly, without fanfare to minimize disruption within the correctional facility. Miller was immediately placed on administrative leave, effectively removing him from his duties at the Dr. Lane Murray unit. This rapid legal action underscored the seriousness with which the authorities viewed the alleged breach of trust and the potential for a larger, more insidious pattern of misconduct. The initial charge, however, was only the first step in a much longer and more complex legal battle that would unravel the layers of his deception. Sarah Jenkins, meanwhile, remained incarcerated, her vulnerability amplified by her pregnancy, and her status as the central figure in a high-profile investigation. The prison environment, already restrictive, became even more isolating. She was transferred to a medical unit within the facility, where her health and the progression of her pregnancy could be more closely monitored. The physical and emotional strain on Jenkins was immense. She was effectively a witness for the prosecution against a powerful figure within the system that held her captive. Her daily life was subject to intense scrutiny, her every move observed, and her interactions with other inmates curtailed. The weight of the impending legal proceedings, coupled with her fragile physical state, placed her under unprecedented pressure. She provided statements to investigators, detailing the nature of her relationship with Officer Miller, offering a crucial insider's perspective on the forbidden liaison. The legal proceedings against Officer Miller moved forward with a grim efficiency. On March 15, 2017, a grand jury formally indicted him, paving the way for a criminal trial. The indictment included additional counts of sexual assault, reflecting the nature of the relationship under the unique power dynamics of a prison. In Texas, an inmate cannot legally consent to sexual activity with a correctional officer due to the inherent imbalance of power, rendering any such act as sexual assault. This legal nuance highlighted the severity of Miller's alleged actions and the profound violation of trust. His attorney, a public defender assigned to the case, entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf. Miller's public persona, that of a dedicated and reliable correctional officer, began to fracture under the weight of these serious accusations, revealing a darker, more predatory side. A critical turning point in the investigation came with the collection and analysis of DNA evidence. In the days following the official confirmation of Sarah Jenkins's pregnancy, samples were meticulously collected from both Jenkins and Officer Miller. These samples were dispatched to the State Forensic Laboratory in Austin, where they underwent rigorous comparative analysis. The results, returned on March 20th, the DNA profile obtained from Sarah Jenkins's developing fetus conclusively matched the DNA profile of Officer David Miller. This scientific certainty provided irrefutable proof of paternity, cementing Miller's direct involvement in the pregnancy and dismantling any lingering doubts about his culpability. The forensic findings were a devastating blow to Miller's defense, validating Sarah Jenkins's claims and solidifying the prosecution's case. The complications of a pregnancy within a correctional facility were multifaceted and profound. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice faced immediate logistical and ethical challenges. The health and well-being of both Sarah Jenkins and her unborn child became a paramount concern, requiring specialized medical care that was often beyond the typical scope of prison infirmaries. Discussions began regarding the future of the baby, whether it would be placed with family, or if the state would assume guardianship. These deliberations added another layer of stress to Sarah Jenkins, who was grappling with the reality of carrying a child fathered by the very officer accused of abusing his position of power. The bureaucratic wheels churned, slow and methodical, while Sarah Jenkins's personal reality accelerated with each passing day, marked by the rapid growth of her unborn child within the stark confines of Cell Block D. The internal pressure mounted, not just on Sarah but on the entire system grappling with an unprecedented and scandalous situation. The morning of June 29, 2017, began like any other within the Dr. Lane Murray unit, a routine cycle of waking inmates and preparing for the day's tasks. The air was thick with the humid Texas summer, and the faint sounds of distant highway traffic occasionally pierced the concrete walls. Inmate Sarah Jenkins, now visibly pregnant, was expected to be awake for the 6:00 a.m. head count. She had been relocated to a specialized medical observation cell within Cell Block D, due to her advanced pregnancy, a measure intended to provide closer monitoring and access to medical personnel. This particular cell, equipped with additional safety features, was meant to offer a controlled environment. However, the controls that defined the rest of the facility would prove fatally insufficient in this instance. At approximately 6:15 a.m., during the routine morning inspection rounds, Correctional Officer Linda Morales approached Sarah Jenkins's cell. Officer Morales had been part of the Dr. Lane Murray unit staff for over a decade. Accustomed to the silence and predictability of the early hours, she peered through the small reinforced window in the cell door, expecting to see Sarah Jenkins stirring, or perhaps already awake. The cell was quiet, unusually so. Jenkins was lying on her bunk, seemingly asleep. Morales initially assumed Jenkins was simply resting. However, a closer inspection revealed a stillness that was unnatural, an absence of the subtle movements of breathing that even deep sleepers exhibit. A sense of unease settled upon Officer Morales. Morales tried to rouse Jenkins by calling her name through the door, then knocking sharply on the steel frame. There was no response. The silence within the cell was surgical, devoid of any discernible sound. Recognizing the immediate red flag, Officer Morales quickly radioed for medical assistance and a supervising officer. Within minutes, Lieutenant Thomas Riley arrived, his face etched with concern. The cell door was unsealed and opened, revealing the grim reality within. Sarah Jenkins lay motionless on her bunk, her body unresponsive. The undisturbed breakfast tray, still wrapped in plastic, sat on a small shelf near her bed, a testament to the fact that her morning routine had been tragically interrupted before it could even begin. The scene inside the cell was stark and devoid of any overt signs of struggle. The bed linens were neat, the personal effects on her small shelf meticulously organized. The air was still and warm. Yet, the overall impression was one of profound disturbance. Sarah Jenkins's physical appearance was concerning. Her skin was pale, and her eyes were partially open, unfocused. The immediate medical assessment by the responding nurse confirmed the devastating truth. Sarah Jenkins was deceased. Her body felt cool to the touch. The news, delivered in hushed tones, reverberated through the early morning quiet of the correctional facility. An inmate, pregnant with the child of an alleged sexual assailant, who was a prison guard, had died within the confines of her cell. The discovery immediately triggered a comprehensive protocol for in-custody deaths. The cell was declared a crime scene. Yellow crime tape was swiftly deployed around the entrance to Cell Block D, restricting access and preserving the integrity of the area. Prison officials secured the entire block, isolating potential witnesses and preventing any accidental contamination of evidence. The Texas Rangers were notified immediately, their investigators dispatched to the scene in Gatesville. This was not merely an unexpected death, it was a death under highly suspicious circumstances, given the ongoing criminal investigation involving Officer David Miller and the inherent vulnerabilities of an incarcerated pregnant woman. The exact time of death was difficult to pinpoint in the initial assessment, but it was clear that Sarah Jenkins had passed away sometime during the silent hours of the night, or very early morning. The grim confirmation of Sarah Jenkins's death sent shockwaves through the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and the broader community. The news traveled quickly, amplified by the existing scandal surrounding her pregnancy and Officer Miller. The immediate questions were profound and urgent. How did she die? Was it an accident, a suicide, or something far more sinister? The presence of her unborn child added an additional layer of tragedy to the already devastating situation. The Dr. Lane Murray unit, already under scrutiny, now faced an even more intense level of public and official inquiry. The quiet predictability of the prison had been shattered, replaced by an unsettling uncertainty that permeated every corner of the facility. The investigation into her death would now become a dual inquiry, inextricably linked to the ongoing case against Officer David Miller. The immediate aftermath of Sarah Jenkins's discovery was a flurry of methodical activity, governed by strict forensic protocols. Upon arrival at the Dr. Lane Murray unit, investigators from the Texas Rangers, alongside local law enforcement officials, meticulously secured Cell Block D. The area around Sarah Jenkins's cell, already taped off, was now subjected to a more rigorous lockdown. Every individual who had accessed the cell block in the preceding 24 hours was identified and slated for interview. The goal was to preserve the scene, ensuring no potential evidence was compromised or inadvertently destroyed. The air within the block became heavy with the metallic scent of forensic chemicals, a stark contrast to the usual institutional smells. The investigation began with a detailed photographic and video documentation of the cell. Every object, from the undisturbed breakfast tray to the placement of Sarah Jenkins's personal effects, was catalogued and photographed from multiple angles. The state of the bedding, the contents of her small locker, and the condition of the cell's fixtures were all noted with clinical precision. Crime scene investigators carefully searched for any anomalies, any misplaced items, or any signs of forced entry or struggle, however subtle. The initial visual assessment revealed little overt evidence of violence, deepening the mystery surrounding her demise. The stillness of the cell became a primary focus of the initial forensic reconstruction. Sarah Jenkins's body was transported from the Dr. Lane Murray unit to the Travis County Medical Examiner's office in Austin. The autopsy, conducted on July 4, 2017 by Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a highly experienced forensic pathologist, was exhaustive. The examination aimed to determine the precise cause and manner of death, a critical step in any investigation of an in-custody fatality. Dr. Chen's initial external examination noted no obvious signs of trauma or external injuries that would suggest a struggle or a violent assault. This absence of overt injury immediately complicated the determination of the manner of death. Internal examinations were conducted with meticulous care, focusing on every organ, tissue, and fluid sample. The report from the medical examiner would later detail the findings with stark clarity. Sarah Jenkins was approximately 20 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. The fetus, a male, was intact and appeared to be developing normally, though its viability was dependent entirely on its mother. Toxicology screens were performed on Jenkins's blood and urine samples to identify the presence of any illicit drugs, medications, or poisons. Every aspect of her internal physiology was scrutinized for abnormalities that might point to a natural cause or an administered substance. The preliminary autopsy results, while comprehensive in their description of her internal state, did not immediately provide a clear answer regarding the cause of her sudden death. Investigators also collected a range of forensic evidence from the cell itself. Swabs were taken from various surfaces for DNA analysis. Fingerprint dust was applied to all accessible areas, and hair and fiber samples were carefully retrieved. The meticulous collection extended to Sarah Jenkins's clothing and the bedding from her bunk, all carefully packaged for laboratory analysis. The goal was to identify any foreign substances, traces of unknown individuals, or environmental factors that could have contributed to her death. This methodical approach aimed to piece together a narrative from the microscopic details left behind, transforming an otherwise sterile cell into a repository of potential clues. The specific dates and times of the investigation were crucial to establishing a precise timeline. The discovery on June 29, 2017 at 6:15 a.m. initiated a cascade of events. The body was transported by 9 ASR a.m. The autopsy began by 2 ASR p.m. Each step was documented with military precision, reflecting the high stakes of a death within a state-operated correctional facility. especially when tied to a prominent public scandal. The focus was on clinical clarity, eliminating conjecture and relying solely on observable data and scientific analysis. Despite the exhaustive initial efforts, the ultimate cause of Sarah Jenkins's death remained elusive in the immediate aftermath of the autopsy, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. The initial findings pointed away from overt violence, directing the focus towards less obvious, possibly internal factors. This ambiguity left a haunting void, demanding further, more specialized investigations. The ambiguous nature of Sarah Jenkins's death compelled the investigation to pivot, shifting focus from a potential violent crime to a more intricate forensic puzzle. The initial autopsy results, while thorough, did not yield a definitive cause of death, presenting investigators with a profound challenge. This absence of clear answers meant that Officer David Miller, already under indictment for sexual assault, now found himself under renewed scrutiny for a far more serious charge: the death of Sarah Jenkins and her unborn child. His legal team maintained his innocence regarding the sexual assault, and now faced the daunting prospect of a potentially new, graver accusation. The pressure on Miller intensified dramatically, transforming his legal predicament from one of professional misconduct to one involving potential homicide. Investigators meticulously re-examined the timeline leading up to Sarah Jenkins's death on June 20. Her last known interactions, her visitors, her mental state, and her reported health complaints in the days prior were all revisited with renewed urgency. Every correctional officer on duty in Cell Block D during the evening of June 28 and the early morning of June 29 was interviewed, their statements cross-referenced for discrepancy. Inmate Jenkins had been observed during her usual evening routine, consuming her dinner, and speaking briefly with a nurse during a routine medication distribution. Nothing in these interactions immediately suggested distress or impending tragedy. The quiet normalcy of those final hours now felt chillingly deceptive. Interviews with other inmates in Cell Block D, some of whom had grown accustomed to Sarah Jenkins's presence and daily routine, yielded a spectrum of observation. Inmate Regina Evans, housed 2 cells down, recalled hearing Jenkins speaking quietly on the evening of June 28, though she couldn't discern the content of the conversation. Another inmate, Tanya Ramirez, reported seeing Sarah Jenkins receive a visit from prison medical staff on the afternoon of June 28, a seemingly routine checkup for her pregnancy. These individual snippets of information, though seemingly innocuous, were painstakingly collected and pieced together by investigators, hoping to reconstruct a complete picture of Jenkins's final hours. The challenge lay in sifting through routine prison life for any hint of abnormality. The news of Sarah Jenkins's death, particularly her pregnancy by a prison guard, ignited a firestorm in the media and public discourse. Local and national news outlets descended upon Gatesville, demanding answers from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Advocacy groups for incarcerated women voiced outrage, highlighting the vulnerabilities of inmates and calling for systemic reforms. The public reaction was one of shock and anger, demanding accountability for a system that had failed to protect one of its most vulnerable individuals. This intense public scrutiny placed immense pressure on the investigation to deliver clear and unambiguous answers, transforming the case from an internal prison matter into a symbol of larger societal failures. Amidst this escalating external pressure, internal tensions within the Lane Murray unit mounted. Correctional officers found themselves under unprecedented scrutiny, their daily routines now viewed through a lens of suspicion. The integrity of the institution was openly questioned, leading to a palpable sense of unease among staff. The ongoing investigation became a relentless force, probing every corner of the facility and every individual associated with Sarah Jenkins. The death of a pregnant inmate in her cell was an unprecedented event for the Dr. Lane Murray unit, forcing a reevaluation of security protocols, medical care provisions, and overall inmate safety measures. The gravity of the situation was undeniable, casting a long shadow over the entire correctional system. The ambiguity of the initial autopsy findings pushed investigators to pursue highly specialized forensic analysis. The medical examiner, Dr. Chen, ordered advanced toxicology screens and a neuropathological examination to detect any subtle indicators of poisoning, natural disease, or internal trauma that might have been missed in the initial gross examination. These specialized tests were conducted at a state-of-the-art laboratory, requiring several weeks for comprehensive results. The delay was agonizing for Sarah Jenkins's family, who awaited answers with a desperate patience. The ongoing criminal case against Officer Miller also hung in the balance, with his legal team leveraging the inconclusive initial findings as a central tenet of their defense. As the weeks passed, a new person of interest subtly emerged, not as a suspect in Sarah Jenkins's death, but as a crucial informational conduit. Inmate Brenda Clark, another resident of Cell Block D, approached investigators with an account of a strained conversation she had overheard between Sarah Jenkins and a visiting family member on the afternoon of. Clark claimed that Jenkins had expressed profound fear and anxiety about her future and the future of her unborn child, particularly regarding the potential for the baby to be taken by the state. This emotional detail added a new psychological layer to the investigation, suggesting Sarah Jenkins was under severe mental distress in the hours leading up to her death. The focus now subtly shifted, considering whether emotional pressure, combined with unforeseen physical factors, could have contributed to her demise, deepening the complexity of the case. The detailed forensic analysis eventually began to unravel the truth, piece by painstaking piece. During July and August of the advanced toxicology reports from the state laboratory were among the first crucial results to return. These tests confirmed the absence of any illicit drugs, poisons, or dangerously high levels of prescription medications in Sarah Jenkins's system, effectively ruling out overdose or poisoning as the cause of death. This finding steered the investigation away from external agents and directed focus towards internal ethnological factors. The clinical clarity of these toxicology results eliminated several lines of inquiry, narrowing the scope of possibilities. Simultaneously, the meticulous neuropathological examination of Sarah Jenkins's brain and other vital organs yielded significant findings. Chen's final autopsy report, issued on August 15, 2017, confirmed that Sarah Jenkins had suffered from a rare and severe form of cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat that could lead to sudden cardiac arrest, especially under conditions of extreme stress. The report noted that while the condition was pre-existing, it was likely exacerbated by the significant physical and emotional strain of her pregnancy, compounded by the profound psychological stress she was experiencing due to her incarceration and the ongoing legal battles. The report concluded that Sarah Jenkins died of natural causes, specifically cardiac arrest, brought on by her underlying heart condition. The manner of death was officially classified as natural. This forensic finding shifted the legal landscape dramatically. While Officer David Miller was no longer implicated in Sarah Jenkins's physical death, the circumstances leading to her increased stress in the very pregnancy itself remained directly linked to his alleged misconduct. The prosecution's focus, therefore, sharpened on the sexual assault charges. Digital forensics played a critical, albeit supporting role in this refined focus. Prison records, Officer Miller's shift logs, and internal communications were meticulously scrutinized. Although no direct communication related to Sarah Jenkins's death was found, the pervasive pattern of Miller's unauthorized access and interactions with Jenkins, dating back months, was further solidified. This body of digital evidence would prove crucial in corroborating Jenkins's earlier statements regarding their relationship. More extensive witness statements were gathered during this period, particularly from other correctional officers who had worked alongside Officer Miller. Some officers, previously hesitant to speak due to professional solidarity, now provided accounts of Miller's increasingly overt favoritism toward Sarah Jenkins. Officer Robert Sanchez, a veteran guard, testified that he had observed Miller providing Jenkins with extra portions of food and allowing her to use the prison phone for extended periods, actions that were clear violations of correctional policy. These statements, though not directly linking Miller to Jenkins's death, built a compelling narrative of his abuse of power and demonstrated a pattern of misconduct that directly led to her compromised state. The motive for Officer Miller's actions, initially obscured by his denials, began to solidify. The investigation concluded that his behavior was driven by a perverse sense of entitlement and a deliberate exploitation of his position of authority over a vulnerable inmate. The evidence suggested a pattern of predatory behavior, using his power to initiate and maintain a clandestine relationship. While the direct link to homicide was removed by the autopsy findings, the profound moral and legal culpability for his actions leading to her pregnancy and the subsequent distress remained. The prosecutor's office, armed with the final autopsy report and the accumulated evidence, made a definitive decision to proceed with the existing charges of official oppression and sexual assault, now bolstered by the grim context of Sarah Jenkins's death. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice faced intense public pressure to ensure accountability. The case of Sarah Jenkins became a symbol of systemic failures and the vulnerability of incarcerated individuals. The prosecutor's office, understanding the gravity of the public's expectations, proceeded with the trial against Officer David Miller with unwavering resolve, ensuring that despite the natural cause of death, the original crimes would not be overshadowed. The detailed forensic reconstruction, though exonerating Miller from homicide, painted a chilling picture of the circumstances that ultimately led to Sarah Jenkins's tragic end. The trial of Officer David Miller commenced on November 6, 2017, at the District Court in Coryell County, Texas. The courtroom was packed, reflecting the intense public and media interest that had shadowed the case for months. Miller, dressed in a somber suit, sat stoically beside his defense attorney, his face impassive as the charges of official oppression and sexual assault were read. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Eleanor Vance, presented a meticulously constructed case, relying heavily on the DNA evidence, which unequivocally established Miller's paternity of Sarah Jenkins's unborn child. This was the cornerstone of their argument, providing irrefutable proof of the illicit sexual relationship. ADA Vance opened her case with a powerful statement, emphasizing the inherent power imbalance within the prison system. Sarah Jenkins was not a willing participant, Vance declared, her voice steady and clear. She was an inmate, completely under the authority and control of Officer Miller. There was no consent, only coercion, a betrayal of trust by a public servant. The prosecution then proceeded to call a series of witnesses. Correctional officers testified about Miller's preferential treatment of Jenkins, detailing instances of unusual access and subtle violations of protocol. Inmate Maria Rodriguez offered emotional testimony, recounting Sarah Jenkins's fear and confusion regarding her pregnancy. Her brief, poignant statements painted a vivid picture of Sarah's vulnerability within the rigid prison environment. The state also presented excerpts from internal prison communication logs and surveillance footage that corroborated the unusual frequency and duration of Miller's interactions with Sarah Jenkins. These pieces of evidence, while not directly showing the sexual acts, demonstrated a pattern of deliberate access that deviated significantly from standard procedure. Officer Miller's personnel file, detailing his training and the strict regulations prohibiting sexual contact with inmates, was also entered into evidence, underscoring his knowledge of the rules he allegedly violated. The sheer volume of procedural violations presented a compelling argument for the official oppression charge. The defense, led by attorney Michael Thorne, focused on discrediting the inmate testimonies, arguing they were motivated by personal grievances or a desire for attention. Thorne also tried to cast doubt on the exact nature of the relationship, suggesting that Sarah Jenkins might have initiated some of the interactions. He emphasized the lack of direct physical evidence of sexual assault, apart from the paternity test, claiming the relationship, while perhaps inappropriate, did not meet the legal definition of assault. The state has presented a narrative built on assumption and inmate gossip, Thorne argued in his opening statement, not on direct evidence of coercion or violence. However, the legal precedent in Texas regarding inmate consent significantly hampered this line of defense. A critical moment in the trial came during the cross-examination of the DNA analyst, who definitively confirmed Miller's paternity. Thorne pressed the analyst on the possibility of contamination or error, but the testimony remained unshaken. The scientific certainty of the DNA evidence was a formidable hurdle for the defense to overcome. The prosecution then carefully presented the medical examiner's final autopsy report. Dr. Elizabeth Chen testified, explaining in clinical detail that Sarah Jenkins had died of natural causes, a cardiac event exacerbated by stress. This testimony, while crucial for clarifying the cause of death, also highlighted the immense physical and emotional burden Sarah Jenkins had endured leading up to her demise. The emotional impact of her tragic end, even if natural, remained tied to Miller's actions. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury began its deliberations on November 20. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. The jurors were tasked with navigating complex legal definitions of consent within a correctional context, weighing witness credibility, and interpreting forensic evidence. The deliberations lasted for 3 days, indicating the careful consideration given to the evidence presented. Each passing hour brought the families of both Sarah Jenkins and David Miller closer to a definitive conclusion, a resolution that would irrevocably alter their lives. On November 23, 2017, the jury returned with its verdict. David Miller was found guilty on both counts, official oppression and sexual assault. The pronouncement of the verdict was met with a quiet but profound exhalation of relief from Sarah Jenkins's family, while Miller's family remained stoic. The convictions carried significant prison sentences. A sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. The verdict sent a clear message regarding accountability for correctional officers who abuse their authority, even in the absence of a direct link to a death. Justice, in this case, was not about who caused the death, but who created the conditions for a life to be consumed by fear and vulnerability. The conviction of David Miller brought a degree of closure, but the aftermath of Sarah Jenkins's death extended far beyond the confines of the Coryell County Courthouse. On December 15, 2017, David Miller was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the sexual assault conviction, and 5 years for official oppression, with the sentences to run concurrently. He was immediately taken into custody. His appeal process would eventually exhaust itself, reaffirming the conviction. The legal battle had concluded, but the human cost remained. The Dr. Lane Murray Unit, the epicenter of this tragedy, underwent extensive reviews of its protocols. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice implemented stricter oversight measures for officer-inmate interactions, enhanced reporting mechanisms for misconduct, and reinforced training on professional boundaries. The case became a stark lesson, integrated into ethics training for new correctional officers across the state. For Sarah Jenkins's family, the verdict offered a fragile sense of vindication, but it could not erase the profound grief. Her mother, Martha Jenkins, spoke quietly outside the courthouse following the sentencing. "No amount of prison time will bring Sarah back," she stated, her voice trembling but resolute. "But knowing he can't do this to anyone else, that's what matters." She died scared, but she wasn't forgotten. The family had sought to gain custody of Sarah's unborn child, but with her death, the state assumed guardianship. The baby, a boy, was ultimately placed in foster care, his identity protected, his life beginning in the shadow of a profound and public tragedy. He was a tangible, yet unspoken, legacy of the abuse and the subsequent fight for justice. The silence in Cell Block D lingered, but it was no longer just the hum of suppressed lives. It carried the weight of what was lost: Sarah Jenkins's life, her unborn child's potential, and the eroded trust in a system designed to contain, not harm. Her story became a haunting reminder of the acute vulnerabilities of incarcerated individuals, particularly women, who exist at the mercy of institutional power structure. The emotional impact, though often understated in official reports, permeated the lives of those touched by the case. Correctional officers grappled with the stain on their profession. The public wrestled with the implications of such systemic failures, and the Jenkins family carried an enduring sorrow that no legal outcome could fully assuage. The Dr. Lane Murray Unit, like all correctional facilities, eventually returned to its semblance of routine. The gates still clanged, the head counts continued, and the cycles of incarceration persisted. Yet for those who knew Sarah Jenkins, or were aware of the tragic circumstances surrounding her death, a chilling lesson remained. The story of an inmate, pregnant by her guard and later found dead, served as a stark and enduring symbol of the unseen battles fought within prison walls. It highlighted that even within the most controlled environments, human frailties and abuses of power could flourish, leaving behind a devastating legacy of loss and trauma that echoed far beyond the cold concrete and steel. The pursuit of justice, while resolute, could never fully heal the quiet devastation left in its wake.